Hello, friends and listeners. Welcome to Truth, Lies, and Alibis, the true crime podcast from three friends sharing their perspectives from having years of 911 dispatching experience.
Episode 32.
The Denise Amber Lee case.
Today, Brittany and I talk about the kidnapping and murder of Denise Amber Lee. We discuss the series of 911 calls made during her abduction and how this event led to changes for 911 dispatch centers.
To start off today's story, I wanted to ask you the question, have you ever taken a phone call from an officer's family member? Or an officer, maybe?
Okay. Yeah, I have. I've taken a couple, so there's been some high priority stuff that I've worked where the significant other of the officer has called in, just wanting to make sure that they were okay. I worked an officer-involved shooting that the wife called in, obviously, trying to figure out if her husband was okay.
That would be me.
Yeah. And then I feel like I say this, actually, now that I think more about it, I have taken quite a few calls for service, where the reporting party are police officers or responders, and let me tell you right now, they're the absolute worst. They are the absolute worst reporting parties, because I don't know. And this is from my experience, and so you can tell me that I'm wrong, but I've taken calls where officers have legitimately told me, you don't need to know that, just get somebody here. And I'm like, if you were on the road going to this call, this is information you'd want to know. I'm just doing my job. I've taken a call from a sergeant who, I'm not going to give any details away, but caused quite a disturbance in the parking lot of a grocery store, reference a road rage situation, and buddy. And then I've also taken, I can't remember if I've mentioned this before on the podcast or not, but I've taken a call from a different sergeant. Maybe that's the trend, not law enforcement, but just sergeants, where they were third-party reporting in a domestic violence that, the victim was on the phone with somebody else, and then the sergeant was on the phone with me, so it was, fourth party by the time I was getting information, and I was working the same radio of the officers, of the deputies that were responding, and I was asking these questions, and he could also, the way our radios worked, and the way our phones worked, I'll explain that really quick, is when we would transmit over the radio, it would mute our voice on the phone. So, if I had radio traffic and I pushed the button or the pedal, it mutes us going over the phone. However, that doesn't stop the caller from hearing my radio traffic, because when I'm on the phone, it comes out of a speaker on my desk versus my headset.
That are typically pretty loud.
Yeah, because I got to hear it over the room and over my call.
Yeah.
So the sergeant, I'm trying to get information, and he can hear, and I know he can hear because he's not responding to me anymore. He's responding to the questions my deputies are asking me over the radio. So he's like, they don't need to know that. They just need to get here. And I'm like, this is a domestic violence call in which, no details, but it was a high priority, it could have been an extremely dangerous situation. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, first of all, he was getting impatient, and I get it. You want people to get there as soon as possible. We're all just doing what we've been trained to do. He's getting impatient with me. He's getting impatient with the guys on the road who are running code, going lights and sirens to this call. And I'd be like, you've been on the other end of this situation.
You know what's going on.
What switch flipped in your head that you forgot how this works? And I feel like I won't give it a very high percentage. Maybe 60-40, maybe 50-50.
Well,
calls in which responders are reporting party go that way. They're either I don't need to give you this information, just get somebody here and I'll give them the information.
Or they give you too much.
Yeah. Actually, I didn't realize I could talk for an hour on just this subject alone, but I guess I could.
Welcome to our TED Talk about how awful first responders are calling 911. I have taken a couple calls where, the other day I took one for a wife who was involved in a accident, Then her husband called because he went out there and was like, are you going to get someone around? And I was like, expecting him to kind of be a jerk because I was like, well, they're super busy, so it might be a while. But he was like, oh, okay. Like, he was nice because typically when you tell the general public that, they get offended. But then when you tell, like, officers that, God forbid, when you're like, bro, you know how this works. Like, it is what it is. You know what I mean? But also, I will admit, 100%, I've said this before on the podcast, I am the worst 911 caller. The worst if something happens to my children, right? Like, anything else, I'm like, you've got a code 34 here, blocking, this is what's in the road, it's blocking this lane, blah, 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 blah. Like, fine. If my kids are involved, I am a mess. A complete and total disaster. So, I can't make fun of anyone.
I mean, everybody responds differently to stress and, like, high priority situations. But it's like when you're talking to an officer over something that's not
life or death,
mm-hmm. and they just, like, forget how to function. And you're like, you do this. You know why I'm asking these questions.
This is not how this works, sir or ma'am. I told Jess this the other day, but I'm going to tell the listeners, Jess. I had the best 911 caller the other day.
Oh, yeah.
The best RP I've ever had in my life. It was some scared college girl, which just, like, I was like, your parents raised you right. Who's your mom? Was she a dispatcher? That's all I could think, because she was literally like, so there's this weird guy. He's kind of hanging out here. He's by building blah, 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 by this apartment. And then she literally was like, he's got brown hair, like, went through his whole description, talked about him, even memorized that he had a logo on his t-shirt and told me. I even said to her, I was like, good job on your description, because I was just, like, in shock. I was like, wow, that was the best description any caller has ever given me. I'm really proud of you, ma'am. Like, I like to think she called her dispatcher mom and was like, Mom, I totally got a compliment because you raised me right. But probably not. All right, so with that being said, we'll dive into today's story, which is a sad one, so get ready. I sent you a 911 call, and we're going to listen to it now.
Hello? Hello? Let me go. Please let me go. I want to see my family again. Okay. Hello? I'm sorry. Hello? I'm sorry. Please let me go. Please let me go. Hello? Please let me go, God, please. Hello? Help me. What's the address? What's the address that you're at? Hello? What is the address that you're at? Hello, ma'am? Where are we going? I gotta go up to the mountain now. Up and around where? Wow, can you see it? That's 4 streets, 5 streets over from your house. I couldn't see everywhere. What's your name, ma'am? Hello? Please. What's your name? Please, my name is Denise. I'm your beautiful husband, and I just want to see my kids again. Your name's Denise? I'm sorry. Thinking too, because he doesn't know. Please, God, please protect me. Are you on I-75? Where are we? Please. Please. Where are you at? Can you tell if you're on I-75? I don't know where your phone is. I'm sorry. Can you just tell me where we are?
Are you blindfolded if you don't press the button?
I don't have your phone. Please, God. I don't have it. I'm sorry.
Do you know this guy?
I don't have it. I'm sorry.
Denise, do you know this guy? She might have the phone laid down and not hear a thing I'm saying, too. He keeps saying on the phone.
I don't know where it is. Maybe if I could see it, I'll help me find it. No, sir.
Denise?
What's the story?
How long have you been gone from your house? How long? Do you know how long you've been gone from your house? What's your last name? Lee?
Yeah.
Do you know what street? Your name's Denise Lee? Can you tell at all what street you're on?
No.
Do you know this guy that's with you?
No.
You don't know him from anywhere?
No, please. Oh, God, help me.
What's your address? What's your home address, do you know?
I don't know. Can you just take me to my house? Can you just take me home? Oh, my God, please.
Can you see, or do you have a blindfold on?
I can't see. Where are we?
Can they turn off the radio or turn it down?
I can't hear you. It's too loud. Where are we? Are you gonna help me? Are you gonna let me out now? Help me.
Okay, so what did you think was going on, or what did you gather from the phone call?
So I will say it's interesting to hear this whole thing because I'm sure you'll get into it later, but I feel like most dispatchers are kind of trained on this case as at least a little bit of what happened. I've heard selections from it, but I haven't heard the whole thing. So my dispatcher instinct, I don't even know if I'm my dispatcher instinct, right? It's just context clues. This woman is obviously like kidnapped by somebody she doesn't know. She doesn't know where she is. She's worried for her life. There's definitely some answers to questions, which she does so smartly. She answers questions so brilliantly. So she can hear the caller, but it seems like the suspect can't, but it's probably their phone because she's saying that I don't know where your phone is. Clear that she's very, distraught. She's putting herself in a lot of danger by taking the suspect's phone to begin with, to sneak the phone and to call for help.
Yep. It was really brave of her.
I'll tell you that within the first 20 seconds, I was already frustrated.
I know, I was watching your face.
From the woman going, hello, while she's like, please, hello.
I was going to say, the 911 dispatcher kind of sounds annoyed. She's just like, hello. We've talked about this before, especially I think when Kylee was on, about how there are some people who would just be like, hello, 911, hello, like over and over again.
Yeah. Well, and it crosses that barrier of trying to initiate a conversation and then realizing your reporting party cannot speak to you and have a conversation. So instead of just being like, hello, like, listen, but then also, like, ask yes or no questions, right? Like, Denise does such a good job of coming up with creative ways to answer these questions. And I have to admit, I laughed out loud when it's not a laughable situation. I laughed out loud when the dispatcher said, "Can you have him turn down the radio? It's too loud." Are you kidding?
I was like, I cannot believe that she said that.
Are you kidding?
Like,
can you please ask the person that's kidnapped you to turn down the radio so we can have a conversation?
Yeah, because
like,
she's already putting herself at risk. So, like, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I called 911 when you kidnapped me. Can you turn down the radio?
They can't hear me.
So I can talk to the dispatcher?" Like, I'm sorry, but what? That was, I had that note too. I was pretty annoyed with that. But she did. She asked him, like you said, she's smart.
Yeah,
she says,
creative way, right?
Like, "Can you turn it down?" or whatever. She was just like, "I can't hear you." So I put, again, you already stressed this, how important it is in situations like this to just listen sometimes. Because she's trying to get information to them. But she obviously can't. Like, I think there were times when she maybe had to put the phone away from her ear, or she couldn't have it right next to her face the whole time. You can tell she made the call without her kidnapper knowing, and she's doing the best to give the information to the call taker. And then, I wrote, you can hear him ask for his phone. She's like, "I don't know where it is." And then I also wonder how he, like, obviously he's an idiot, but he didn't catch on. Because she, some of the stuff she's saying, I'd be like, why is she saying that? But maybe it was just such a high stress situation,
Yeah.
And that's not even the full call, I don't think. But that's 6 minutes of that call. I think the whole call is 9 minutes total or something like that. To me, that's long enough to dispatch someone. I don't know. I don't know the whole extent of it.
So it sounded like they had a possible highway that she was on, but
yes.
Do we know if they got locational information based on the phone call?
So I'm not sure if that was the whole reason that they couldn't get someone out, but so this story that I'm going to tell you, there's multiple times they could have got somebody to help her. Multiple times when
at least
they
had call in and somebody working on it. Yeah.
When they could have sent someone, they could have, like, there's a lot of things that are frustrating about this whole story, but I wanted to kind of start off with that 911 call because that 911 call in itself is so frustrating. Just as a listening to it and wanting to get her help, and as a 911 dispatcher being like, why are you asking that question? Why are you saying hello, hello, hello? Like,
yeah, I feel like that's part of the situational awareness that you have to have too, is realizing that her abductor doesn't know she's on the phone and not asking, like, what's your address? Is she just going to be like, she tries to come up with creative ways, like, I want to go home, and, like, trying to bring it into the conversation, but she can't be like, "Oh, I live at 123 Main Street." Like,
and then when she was like, "My name's Denise Amberly, I have a beautiful husband,
kids,"
like, she was trying to make it sound like she was trying to, like, humanize herself to him, but
and I think that's why it's so frustrating, is because she is trying so hard to kind of do, I won't call it the impossible, but do something very difficult. She's trying to relay this information that...
In that situation, it's kind of impossible. Like, it's kind of impossible to do all that without him noticing, right? Which eventually he does notice, because he says, "Where's my phone? Where's my phone?" And eventually he sees that she has it and he hangs up. It's just frustrating because they had that long on the phone with her and they still weren't able to send her the help she needed.
Yeah, I feel like if I was the dispatcher in that situation, like, at least in our center, right? Like, if we have an abduction or something like that, or we have somebody's life in danger and we're unable to get a location, that doesn't mean a call doesn't go in. The call still goes in, and we don't have to wait to have an address to put a call in. So we put the call in, we put as much information so we have this female, her name is Denise, she's kidnapped on the phone, like, all the things that we've talked about, right? All the things that we know from what she provided goes in that, and then it gets dispatched immediately, and then we start working on phone ping, we start calling other agencies, like, there's a million other things to do while we're trying to get a location. Like, that call doesn't sit there until we know to go to 123 Main Street, because it's 8 times out of 10, it's never that easy.
Yeah.
Especially in situations like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Between 1529 and 1830, on January 17th, 2008, there were a total of 5 911 calls placed. According to Wikipedia, 4 were routed to operators in Sarasota County, Florida, the other placed by Jane Kowalski, and the 4th in the sequence was routed to operators in Charlotte County, Florida. Each 911 call was in reference to the kidnapping of Denise Amber Lee. Denise Amber Lee was the daughter of Sergeant Rick Goff, who worked for Charlotte County Sheriff's Office in Florida. She was born August 9th of 1986 in Inglewood, Florida, and at the time of her kidnapping, she was 21 years old. She was a stay-at-home mom to her 2 boys, Noah and Adam, and was married to her husband, Nathan Lee. Nathan Lee worked 3 jobs at the time to afford Denise to stay home with Noah and Adam. They rented a home in North Fort, Florida, and at the time the subdivision they were renting was still in the construction phase, so not a lot of people lived in the area. The couple thought it was a perfect community to raise their 2 boys. However, Denise's dad would later say he was kind of hesitant about it because it was kind of in like a little rural area and there wasn't a lot of people out there. But he was like, it was cheap rent and it was a nice home and it was what they could afford. So on the afternoon of January 17th, Nathan Lee came home from one of those jobs to find all the windows in the house closed and Noah and Adam in a crib together. He thought it was really weird because he had spoken to Denise earlier that day and they had talked about how she had opened all of the windows because they were trying to save money on air conditioning, so she would just open all of the windows. And he also found it weird because Denise was nowhere to be found, but her cell phone and keys were lying on a chair. So his 2 kids are at home alone and all the windows are closed. Nathan called 911 at 1529 and told dispatchers he could not find her. He then called his father-in-law, Rick, who had worked as a deputy for 25 years and was a detective at the time. Rick would be in contact with the Northport police to let them know that this was not the same typical missing spouse report and he knew something bad had happened. Because sometimes, especially back then, they'd be like, oh, you can't report an adult missing for this many hours or whatever. They would just be like, oh, they probably just disappeared on their own. But he would call and he was like, this isn't normal. She's left her 2 kids there. She would never do that, that kind of thing. So investigators would go door to door and spoke to a neighbor who told them that a white male in a dark green Camaro was sitting outside of Denise's house for a good 15 minutes, about an hour from the time Nathan got home. They got the description of the vehicle and the subject within that vehicle, and they had it all within an hour of her being reported missing. So they got it into their dispatch, got all that from the neighbor. The next 911 call would come in from Denise Lee herself at 1814, which is the 911 call we just listened to. Investigators told Denise's dad about the 911 call, and he was able to hear it and verify that it was indeed her calling. At 1823, 9 minutes after Denise's phone call, and 3 hours since she was reported missing, a woman called 911 telling dispatchers that her father's cousin, Michael King, had stopped by her dad's house with a girl tied up in her car. The female tried to get out of the car, and Michael put her back into the vehicle, and Sabrina, this is the caller, told the operator that he borrowed a shovel and a gas tank from her father, and at that point, Denise was only 4 miles from her home. So 4 miles from her home is where this Sabrina's dad lived. She said he didn't want anyone to know it was him. He wanted to remain anonymous, kind of thing. When she calls, I didn't play it because it's just kind of her giving that information, but when she calls, the dispatcher says, oh, we've been looking for this girl, because the vehicle matches the description of the vehicle, and she's like, thank you for calling, we've been looking for this girl. So at 1830, 7 minutes after Sabrina's call, another witness, Jane Kowalski, calls, but it's routed to Charlotte County because of her location. So it's routed to a different dispatch center.
Okay.
She was reporting that she saw a child in a blue 90s to early 2000s Camaro who looked to be in distress on US 41 southbound at Chamberlain. She said she saw the child screaming in a car and banging on the window. And in the Dateline interview, she says, like, they pulled up at a light together, kind of, and she could hear the screaming, and it was like nothing she'd ever heard before. She was like, that's not right. Something's wrong. So she thought for sure it was a child being abducted, and she starts to follow him. She even kind of slows down to try and get his license plate. The call taker seems to be getting everything down. Like, in the 911 call, you can hear her say, okay. Like, she's getting it down, but she also seems kind of distracted. there were even like a couple times in the 911 call where there's like too long of a pause. Like, you know how when we're in training, they tell us don't pause too long because then the caller doesn't really know if you're listening, or you could lose the caller, they could hang up, or they can just get frustrated because they're like, are you freaking listening to me? She like is telling her she's trying to follow the car, but eventually she loses him because he turns and she can't follow. So at 1842, investigators enter Michael King's home to find it empty with evidence that someone had been held captive there. There was duct tape with long strands of hair and other kind of evidence that suggested he had held someone captive in the home. However, no one's there. At 1850, the fourth 911 call came in from a payphone. It was Michael King's cousin, Sabrina's dad, and remember, Sabrina called at 1823, right? At 1850 is when he calls. He says he wants to remain anonymous.
Does this go to the first center or the second one?
Yes, it goes to the primary center. So it sounds like, from everything I read online, the main center that took Denise's phone call and like the report of her missing took every phone call except for James.
The one on the highway. Okay.
Yes. So he does it. He's like, I want to remain anonymous. He's hesitant to give any information, but he did give the call taker information that the Camaro has this black covering on the front. So kind of like a more distinct feature of the Camaro. Mm-hmm. And then they eventually find out his name's Harold, obviously, because Sabrina called and gave her information. So through that, they were able to find out that her dad's name is Harold, and that's who's calling, because he says, like, someone came to my house and this happened.
Okay.
So investigators go to the house to speak to him, and he tells them that at 1800, Michael had come to his house to borrow a gas can. Remember, Sabrina called at 1823, right? Mm-hmm. So 23 minutes after, he shows up. And he's like, this is the story he gives his cousin. He says that his lawnmower had broken down in a ditch and he needed a shovel to help dig it out, and he needed some gasoline, so he needed to borrow a shovel and gas. Don't let people borrow a shovel and gas, people.
No, that's weird.
Suspicious.
But he also saw the girl at that point in time too, right? Because he told Sabrina that.
Yes. So at one point, Denise got out of the car and Michael struggled to get her back in, but not before she was able to shout, "Call the police," to Harold. Harold did not call the police. When interviewed by the media, Harold told them that he thought it was another one of Michael's crazy relationships and that he wasn't bothered enough to call 911 yet. But he did call his daughter to tell her, this is weird, which I'm like, okay, one, if somebody yells at you, like, moral of the story here is someone says, call the police, call the fucking police. Even if it's your cousin who's a weirdo and has weird relationships, okay, that doesn't mean he doesn't beat them. Like, even if it was a weird relationship, who's to say that he's not abusing this woman, right? Well, and also, like, call the police and he's borrowing gasoline and a shovel from you. Does he even own a lawnmower? Like, that's the real question. Probably not.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, right? Is he felt weird enough about it to call his daughter.
Yeah. So like I said, PSA right here. If somebody says, call the police, especially if they look in distress, call the police.
If they're trying to get away from somebody and that someone shoves them back in a car.
7 hours after the Camaro had been seen in Denise's driveway, about 4 miles from the 911 call placed by Jane, a trooper pulls Michael over. So they're able to, like, finally pull him over. When Michael gets out of his vehicle, his pants are soaked from the waist down. He has a cell phone with a removed battery in his pocket and a muddy shovel in his car. But Denise is nowhere to be found.
When was the traffic stop?
7 hours after the Camaro had been seen in Denise's driveway. So 7 hours after she was kidnapped, 6 hours from the first 911 call from her husband.
Wow.
Hours after the arrest, Harold, the anonymous tipster, comes to the station and has a conversation with Michael. That conversation's recorded. Michael tells him that he and Denise had both been kidnapped. He says he was blindfolded and that he couldn't tell where Denise had been taken. King took the police to multiple locations and it turned up nothing. He's arrested for her kidnapping and Denise's family is still hoping that she's alive at this point. So, okay.
So the guy that's driving the car when the trooper pulls him over says, "Oh, I was kidnapped too?"
Yep. He says he and Denise, this girl who doesn't know him at all, right? Who he threw back in the car by himself, right? Harold saw just Michael and Denise in that car. That's the only people he said were in the car. But he's like, oh yeah, we were kidnapped together and I was blindfolded. Really? You were blindfolded while you were driving the car and kidnapped her? You were blindfolded when you threw her back in the car and asked for a shovel and gasoline? Yeah. Okay. So police kind of look into Michael King's background and they find that he had first moved to Florida in 2002 after a bitter divorce. He was an out-of-work plumber with no criminal history. However, he had some disturbing accusations against him from a salon owner who, I don't know if he came in to like get his hair done or what happened, but he brought in this girl and he said she was 15 and they thought, oh, maybe it's like a cousin or a daughter or something. And then they like started making out. And he said he met her on the internet. So that's weird in itself. There's also reports that he had exposed himself on the job as a plumber. So he's just like going around whipping his while he's plumbing. I don't know. And then someone actually made an accusation that he had raped her, which 100% I believe after hearing all this stuff, right? However, nobody ever reported all of these things to cops. A few days after her abduction on January 19th, and just half a mile from where King was arrested, a canine came across a shallow grave where Denise's naked body had been buried. She was shot in the head.
Did they find a gun in his car?
Heartbreaking. I don't know. I didn't see anything about the gun. That's a good question. We'll have to look that up. After seeing reports of the murder and abduction of Denise on the news, Jane, remember Jane, whose call was routed elsewhere, calls the police to see if they need more information from her. She recognized the picture of the man, knew instantly it was the guy that she'd seen, she thought, abducting a child, but then realizes, oh God, he was abducting this woman. So she calls, she's like, do you need anything else from me? And Northport had no idea that she had even called 911. The dispatcher who took the call never even sent the call out. It took 2 days for investigators to find and review the 911 call. The operator had made the connection between the 911 call and the Denise Amber Lee case, and instead of writing information in the call, this is according to what I read online and what I saw on Dateline, right? I used Dateline and some other sources such as like Wikipedia and the Denise Amber Lee Foundation site. So according to all those, it comes out that instead of writing the information in the call taker yelled across the room to dispatchers and just assumed that they had heard her and gotten the information out. Which makes no fucking sense to me.
No,
So I don't know if maybe there was like maybe there was a mistake and she thought she was writing it in the call and she's yelling across the room to them. I don't know. Either way, it's kind of unacceptable.
Also, if she's familiar enough to make the connection, that means you know what a big damn deal this is, right? So I'm not going to sit here and like make any assumptions that I know how their center works, right? I don't know how they process information, who gives out the information or anything like that. But like if it was me, and so the way our center worked is within the same room, we had dispatchers for county sheriffs and dispatchers for the police department, dispatchers for the fire department. Everybody's all in the same room. We all work together. If I took a call for the police department while I'm dispatching for county, I'm not going to be like, hey, there's an accident over here, and then carry on with my day. Like, the call still, like, we share a communication center, the call goes in, and that means also, like, something high priority, there's and we've said it earlier this episode, there's legwork with that. It's not just going to be like, hey, this car is seen here, pretty sure it's related to Denise's, and then that's it.
Well, and also, like, for me, even in our center, when we put it in the call, or we add to a call, or we put a call in and it's high priority, we do shout it across the room, right? But we make sure it gets into the computer. For me, sometimes I don't even hear those people, to be honest with you.
No.
Because I will be so busy working West or whatever radio I'm working, and it's insane. And I can't listen to them, right? And sometimes I even get frustrated when someone comes over to me and they're like trying to give me information that they put in the call. Because call notes, at least when you write it in a call, it's written. So like everybody, it's not like a game of telephone where I could be like, hey, it's at this place.
Yes.
And she hears something completely different. It's in writing. So they know exactly what I heard.
Yeah. And also like if it was the center that we worked at, and we got that information and it was a neighboring city or a neighboring agency, there's a phone call to the agency.
Yeah, to update them.
We just got a call. This is where the suspect is, blah, 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 blah. Like, I don't know if that dispatcher, I mean, we can talk all day long about things that should have been done differently. I don't know if it was shouted out with the assumption that whoever like, if there was a designated person responsible for working with that agency that was supposed to call them, whatever it is, like, the ball was dropped, right? Like, we can point out a lot of different things where
it just didn't go the way it should have gone.
Regardless of the situation, like, any situation, life or death, like, it needs to be in the system. Everybody needs to know. Everybody from A to Z, all through the line, they need to know that.
Also, like, so that's a good thing that you bring up, because the other day I worked this call, right, where this female somehow she got a hold of her Airbnb person and said she was in danger, and they called it in. So then our deputy went there to check on her, gets there, nobody's there. Yeah. I get another 911 call from the same female. She says she's in danger again, she needs help, and then hangs up. Of course, because of that, my deputy's like, start a phone ping. It took hours, but finally she was able to call, and he just dropped her off on a street 2 hours away. But the whole time that we were pinging a phone, I was like calling DPS because it was on the highway. So I would call and I'd be like, they're here now. They're here now. They're here. Yeah. Like, we were calling all of the agencies, different counties, because it's 3 different counties that she went through, right? We're calling those counties. We're giving ATLs. We're calling everybody we can. Luckily, she was able to get out of the car, and finally we got her some help, and we sent that police department to pick her up. But that's what you should be doing. Like, don't be that dispatcher. Yeah. Like, I know this sounds like I'm just giving advice. Don't be that dispatcher who just does the bare minimum, right? Go above and beyond, because you could save someone's life, quite literally. And isn't that the reason you wanted to be a dispatcher? Like, I mean, not everybody, right? But you want to help people. That one agency that you call that maybe some other dispatcher might have forgotten to or might not have wanted to, or that one call note that you add could change that outcome. That's all. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of pressure, but it's true.
Yep.
Sorry, I went on a long rant. Okay, so the sheriff would go on TV and say that Charlotte County had not, this is a quote, screwed up, and that he also said, assuming things would have gone differently, Denise would be alive is a mistake. So he's basically saying, like, we don't know what the outcome would have been if this mistake hadn't been made, but we didn't screw up. That's basically what he's saying. He tells the media in an interview that the stress of trying too much had actually been the issue. He said it was too much chaos and too much stress because Denise was one of their own. And this is Charlotte County Sheriff John Davenport. So he's defending these dispatchers, and he calls the incident a missed opportunity.
We don't know, right? We don't know that if that call had been communicated across all points, right, that anything would have changed. But you also can't say that it wouldn't have.
Well, I'm going to tell you something that shows that it would have. So if someone had actually responded to Jane's call, if they had been given the street that he had turned down to, it came out later that there was a deputy that was sitting in that area. Like, literally on that street at that time. Deputies would come forward to say that they were in the area of where the Camaro was, and they could have, like, one was sitting on that street, and other deputies could have come to that area. Like, it came out later that there was actually units in the area that could have responded, and they didn't. So
yeah, you can't say that no error had been made.
No, and the thing is, we're all human.
You're right. We are human. Humans make mistakes. And unfortunately, when you work in this type of job, that can have severe repercussions.
Somebody can
But
die.
at the same time, that doesn't mean you can be like, oh, well, you know what I mean? Like, that doesn't.
No. And this fact is, does it suck? Is it awful? Is it horrible? Yeah. But I feel like it's almost more horrible for them to not just be like, we made a colossal mistake.
I agree. Yeah,
and apologize.
I agree that it's almost disrespectful to be like, oh, we didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did.
Mm-hmm. And the fact is, her dad works for you. He knows you made a mistake, right? So the sheriff would order remedial training for the call takers involved and a 2-day suspension for the dispatchers who didn't get the information out in a timely manner.
I'm so torn on that, right? Because, like you said, right, we are human, and humans make mistakes, and when you work in a job such as this, mistakes can have literal deadly outcome. Still, like, I definitely think that people need to be held accountable, so you look at the, like, oh, a 2-day suspension, remedial training and stuff like that, but I guess for me, like if that was me, if I had made that mistake and that was the outcome of my mistake, I would never get over that. That guilt would be on me.
Yeah.
Like I would do that to me, you know?
But also my question too is like, because of this, there's been a push for more training for dispatchers, right? That's because of this case specifically. So my question is, what was their training? What would they be expected to do? Was there a clear expectation to add information to the call? Or what was the way their center worked? My thing is, yes, 100%, they failed her. They failed her. They failed her dad. They could have saved her life. That's my thought, right? But that's just kind of how I feel. Like maybe they would have had that much more of a chance to stop him before he got to where he could shoot her and bury her. However, as a dispatcher, would I think that it would be fair for me to be fired if I wasn't adequately trained or there wasn't expectations that were set in stone by my agency that were clear and that I had been trained on? And I gotta say no. It sucks because I really wish that they had done better, but a dispatcher is only as good as they're trained.
Absolutely.
That's the problem, right? I don't know if firing them would have been the answer because of the training they had received.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly valid, right? That you can't hold them to standards that were never placed, right? So if there's no policies, protocol, training in place that says when something like this happens, this is what you're responsible for, then you can't, if they don't do that, you can't slap their wrist and hold them accountable for something like that. So yeah, I think that's kind of what I was going for too, right? That like some people may wish that they would have gotten fired, or they may wish there would have been more like occupational repercussions, like occupational things to come down on top of them because of what happened. But you've got to look at the situation as a whole and even ask, like, were these dispatchers set up for success, or were they set up for failure? Like,
yeah, it's just like the whole thing is heartbreaking. Denise's father and husband were obviously angered by this, which is understandable, as her father worked for the county and her husband was outraged and even said those dispatchers still have their job and it's almost like they are flipping a coin and there's a 50-50 chance of failure on their part, which is like, he was basically saying like, it's a 50-50 chance that you're going to get someone who actually knows how to do their job and do it well, kind of thing. Yeah. The day of her funeral, DNA evidence was returned that linked Michael King to the rape and murder of Denise Amber Lee. So he would be charged with kidnapping, murder, and rape. He would plead not guilty to all of the charges. In the back seat of the Camaro, Denise had shoved her hair with the roots intact under the seat and a heart-shaped ring she had always wore. A ring that Nathan Lee had bought her the first Valentine's Day they were together.
So sad.
Yeah,
so smart.
They had only been together a few weeks, and he bought her this little heart. He said it was like a $50 cheap Valentine ring. She never took it off. He said he knew that she had to have like deliberately placed it there, and she would know all this stuff, right? Because her dad's a cop, so she knew what to do. She did everything she could to get help. And then when she thought, oh God, there might not be help coming, she did everything she could to make sure he would get caught. Michael's semen was found in Denise's shorts near her body. Denise's blood and Michael's semen were also found in the duct tape used to bind her wrists. At the funeral, there was a 30-mile funeral procession. So many police officers, firefighters, and first responders showed up to support Denise. The dad said there was like even kids coming out of schools to like stand there, and Nathan would speculate that Denise may have thought that he was pulling up because he had a car that looked similar to King's. He would tell Dateline that he and Denise had talked about opening the windows, like I said, to save money on the air conditioning, and she had opened them all. But you'll remember when Nathan got home, all of the windows were shut. He thinks this was an attempt to either on his part so people couldn't hear her scream, but he really thinks that Denise closed all the windows so her kids couldn't get out. As well as putting them in the crib together. That was like her last kind of act as a mom, was just to keep them safe. Nathan would eventually file a lawsuit against the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office, the same sheriff's office you'll remember that Denise's father worked for. He said it wasn't entirely their fault that she died because they didn't pull the trigger, but they had failed her. He would end up settling, and at one of the stories I read, it said it was $1.25 million that he settled for, which he kind of put back into the Denise Amber Lee Foundation. And Denise's father would go on to get a bill passed called the Denise Amber Lee Law. He told Dateline, and this is a quote, Denise had confidence in the system. That's why she dialed 911. And she was trying to get her life saved. And then Jane Kowalski had confidence in the 911 that night and tried to get Denise saved. And that didn't happen. The act requires emergency call takers to undergo 232 hours of improved 911 operator training. It was passed unanimously by Florida legislature. Nathan is the founder of the Denise Amber Lee Foundation, the one you took the training from. In June of 2008, 6 months after Denise's murder, is when he founded that foundation. According to their website, and this is a quote, the foundation wants to use the emotional power of Denise's story to motivate and inspire 911 personnel to remember why they do what they do. Arguably one of the most difficult professions on the planet, the foundation wants to remind them how important they are and what a critical role they play every day in public safety. And their mission statement is to support and promote public safety through uniform training, standardized protocols, defined measurable outcomes, and in parentheses it says quality assurance, technological advances to 911. So, at the trial, the prosecution presented the DNA evidence and other forensic evidence, including the hair in the ring, and then also King's cell phone. They also called eyewitnesses, including Jane and King's cousin, and the defense attempted to provide reasonable doubt by bringing evidence of tampering and contamination to the jury, suggesting that one of King's friend had committed the crime. So they're like, it was King's friend, it wasn't him. I'm like, okay, he just so happened to have a bottle of his semen lying around. Yeah, okay.
Weird friends.
So then the defense would rest without calling any witnesses. On August 28, 2009, after deliberating for just 2 hours and 5 minutes, they found King guilty of kidnapping with intent to commit a felony, sexual battery, and first-degree murder. And on September 4th of that same year, the jury recommended the death penalty. He filed an appeal in 2016, but his sentence was upheld, and he's currently incarcerated at Union Correctional Institute in Florida. His execution date hasn't been scheduled yet. On the Denise Amber Lee Foundation website, Denise's story is shared, and in the About section, this comment really stood out to me. It says, "We envision a time when a citizen's first call for help will be answered by a state-of-the-art 911 call center staffed with dedicated and highly trained professionals, a time when 911 will fail no one." So on their website, there's a variety of training opportunities, and they have a bunch of different stuff that they go to, so we'll link their website on our Facebook and our social media. But I just want to say again, a call taker or a call center is only as good as their employees and their training they received. Unfortunately, there's not a standard for every single 911 dispatch center in the U.S., right? We've talked about this before. I feel like there definitely should be. However, speaking as a 911 dispatcher, I want to encourage everybody who's dispatching to soak up all the training that you can. Even if maybe you have to seek out those opportunities yourself and bring them to your higher-ups, or maybe you don't have the money to, but there's a bunch of stuff online.
Yeah, that's one thing to remember. I think even going to the Denise Amber Lee Foundation page and reading their mission statement and stuff like that, all of that is extremely powerful. That is a circumstance where it should leave an impression on dispatchers. It should have an impact and remind them that we literally save lives. Mm-hmm. We're not driving the fire trucks, we're not pulling up in the ambulance, and we're not the ones that have the badges, but dispatchers help save lives. And the burnout and the hours and the stress and everything can get to you, but at the end of the day, that's one of the things that I think is important to remember to keep you going is that, when that person calls 911 and they are in desperate need of help, that there's that pride that you're there to get them help.
Yeah.
That pride that you're doing your job. This is why you're a 911 dispatcher. Is because when that person calls 911, you are there to help them. Yep. That's why you do this job.
I agree.
We're not saying that, I know we've kind of gotten pushback before, right, when we talk about what dispatchers can do better and all that kind of stuff. But there's no secret that the Denise Amber Lee case is significant in the respect to dispatchers, right? There's specific dispatcher training for it. So it's not like we're saying anything new here. But I think that's the takeaway, is just remembering the impact that a dispatcher has. We are taking information and disseminating it out to help people. That was a very long rant about.
Nope. I think it was a good one.
My last final note, my final thought is a huge thank you to each and every single dispatcher out there. You are saving lives, and what you do is important, and you do have one of the most thankless jobs out there because you're the last people that are thought about in a situation. But I recognize the hard work you do. I appreciate each and every single one of you, and keep doing that hard work.
Thank you for listening. Additional information for each case can be found on our website, truthliesandalibis.buzzsprout.com. New episodes will be uploaded every Monday. Find us on Facebook and Instagram at Truth Lies and Alibis.